It is particularly ennobling to think that someone who is a scholar, a professor, someone who's been head of the worldwide professional association of scholars in your discipline would also be the leader of your country. I was thinking as I walked down this beautiful hallway, I passed a picture of Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, and he, of course, is the only president that we would recognize who would be a scholar of your standing. So it's really quite remarkable for those of us in higher education to be able to salute you. The executive director is exactly right. Yale, for the last 9 years in particular, has accelerated its efforts to try and imagine what it means to be a global university. And for our 300th birthday to ourselves in 2001, we gave ourselves several presents. One, we created a Center for the Study of Globalization and lured former Mexico President Ernesto Zedillo to come be the director. And we're really quite thrilled that President Cardozo has been a distinguished visitor twice at the center. We also embarked upon a major investment in human capital. You may know that most U.S. universities have very small pools of funds available to recruit international students. We were the first to say that we were going to treat every international applicant to our first degree program as if they were U.S. students. And what this means is that if your family makes less than $60,000 U.S. dollars anywhere in the world, and you're admitted to Yale, your parents pay nothing for you to go to any 4 years at Yale. And if your parents make between $60,000 U.S. dollars and $200,000 U.S. dollars, you'll get a proportionate scholarship. This, we think, is an important investment to realize what the executive director said of becoming a global university. And we've actually done a little bit better. We're up to about 17 or 18%. But what we have found is that there is not a sense of expectation around the world by young people that we would be open in this way. So one of the reasons we have had Yale Weeks in Sao Paulo for each of the last 3 years and have been welcomed so warmly here at the Institute is to try and bring faculty and deans down here and to get the word out by meeting with secondary schools, meeting with university faculties to reinforce our interest in being both a partner and also, if you will, a part of the supply chain of educating young people who will come back and have leaders in this society. The third part of our birthday present to ourselves was that we were going to make some investments in some serious research partnerships with leading countries and leading universities around the world in those countries. We, like many U.S. universities, had actually been, you could say, too equitable. We treated almost every country the same. We didn't focus research activities in countries. We didn't focus student recruitment activities. And we recognized that what we should do is what many companies would do, is to focus on those that will be the strongest and have the opportunity for the greatest consequence for good in this century. So it won't surprise you that one of our 8 strategic targets for this decade is here in Brazil. So we have wanted to create research partnerships that are enduring, not episodic with just one faculty member happening to find a colleague in the university, but to have a program, for example, which we inaugurated today, where we have our Department of Infectious Disease, leading faculty at the University of Sao Paulo. We also have a node at the University of Ghana, since they have, unfortunately, greater incidence of infectious disease. And we're looking for a Middle Eastern partnership to have faculty and students work on the same research protocols over a sustained number of years to break through for some of the discoveries we need that will help peoples in all parts of the world. So that's a frame of what we were about in some instance. But what I really wanted to share with you this afternoon are some of the observations I have seen going around the world, representing Yale and talking with universities and with their governments, particularly the ministries of education. I spent a lot of time doing this. In the first 6 months of this year, I'll have 3 trips to Asia. I'll have 2 trips to the Middle East. I have going to go to Singapore the week before last. I'll be in Beijing the week after next. I'll do Italy, Switzerland, and London. So I'm not home as much as I should be at Yale, but I do have a chance to have interesting conversations that I thought I might share of what I'm seeing in some of these countries. The first is a positive note, that I do see that in so many countries there is increasing recognition beyond the Ministry of Education of the potential power, if captured correctly, of how tertiary education can be an engine of economic growth to advance personal well-being, but equally and perhaps more importantly for those of us gathered here, what it can do for advancing the well-being of society by health measures, social indices, as well as economic well-being of a society. And just to take three different, if you will, snapshots, one we were just talking about, is I just came across a recent study in the United States that looked at the economic, if you will, earning power of those on average, so it's sort of averaged across a lifetime, on average who have a university degree in the United States versus those in the United States that only have a high school degree. And the average annual income was 80% greater by those who had a university degree versus those that had a high school degree. Or if you go from a different kind of dimension in a very different part of the world, go to sub-Saharan Africa. The World Bank's latest study show what we intuit, but they have confirmed, that if you give mothers a full primary education, with each year of secondary education, the health of their children improve, and therefore the health of their society improve, and the well-being of their economic basis will improve. Or another one in a very different part of the world from there, if you go north, if you look, and many of you probably know this, in continental Europe, excuse me, not continental Europe, if you look at all of Europe, there is one city which has become a magnet for 10% of the venture capital of all of Europe. Anyone have a guess of where it is? All of Europe. Dublin, that's a good guess. What else? It actually is Cambridge, England. Why? Cambridge University, with its research labs, have become a magnet because it's looking for how the research in the laboratories can, if you will, migrate into the commercialization for the betterment not only of Britain, but actually for the world. So these very different snippets suggest that there is this recognition that if it could be done right, tertiary education is, I think, as you know, can be important. But the burgeoning numbers of those going into tertiary education, if you look, the numbers going in India, for example, between 1970 and 2007 in tertiary education, there's been a 6-fold increase in those going on to university. But we know that the increase in numbers may help part of the equation for the training of tomorrow's workforce, but it is not by itself any recipe for the education of leaders. Certainly, any of us know that access to education does not spell excellence for what the product will be. And in some of the countries that I've been visiting that I want to share in candor with you, there is, in some cases, a sense of really a tussle, a bit of a challenge of how you balance the burgeoning numbers of those going into tertiary education with a sense of how do you find the formula to educate some for the leadership cadre needed by the society, that there's some tension between both of these undertakings. Some of the individuals I speak to say that, at least in their country, they need a reshaping of some parts of tertiary education. At heart, what I hear is frankly what we are grappling with in the United States too, is how do you equip students with the skills and the habits of mind necessary for the agility needed for the 21st century problems that we are confronting. Many places are reporting with greater clarity now that the model of a teacher imparting a specific body of knowledge to students and therefore expecting the students to, if you will, parrot it back in examinations is just not what is going to be required for the successes we need in the 21st century. Excuse me. This I think we generally know, but the question, we also recognize old-fashioned training, in our case, for what we call associate colleges, which are a level between secondary school and full university, there is still a real role for training. When any of us call a plumber to our house to fix our faucet, we don't want them to be too creative. We want them to fix the faucet by the handbook. But if you think about the kinds of leaders you are recruiting, whether it's to run businesses, whether it's to run your universities, whether it's to run arts organizations, or certainly to lead governments, we're looking for those that have the habits of mind of being able to grapple with increasingly complex issues, to be able to discern equitable and fair resolutions, to be able to communicate them effectively, and then, of perhaps most difficulty, as a president must know, to be able to galvanize the public support or the private support, depending on your venue, to a greater common cause. We know the limitations on relying on the set of an inherited body of knowledge. One of the examples I was thinking about earlier this afternoon was, if you think about immutable truths that some of us grew up, at least my age, that many of us learned the planets in the solar system and could recite still today the number of the 9 planets and what they were in relationship to the sun. Lo and behold, even something that seemed as immutable as that, we learned 10 or so years ago that actually there was yet another planet way out there. And right now, if any of us forgot whether the Earth was third from the sun or not, we could Google it in 30 seconds. It's not the kind of knowledge that's going to actually make the difference for training for leadership. This we know. And the irony, I think, is that we have had the half-life of knowledge decrease just at the time when our whole life is increasing. The statistics in the United States show this. If you were born in 1900, your average life expectancy was 49 years old. In other words, by the time you finished university, if you were so fortunate, you were almost halfway through the grave. So you think about that. Your university education did not have to last you very long. Now, I didn't actually check what it was here, but in Argentina in 1900, the average life expectancy was 39 years old. Their current life expectancy is 75. You're about the same as the United States. You see my point. When you leave university, there is long life, God willing, for us to be able to apply our knowledge. And if we think the knowledge is a body of facts and figures, we recognize those of us, as particularly representation of professors here, those who have been public servants, that that's not going to serve us well. So the question is, how do we have this kind of critical problem-solving orientation? You don't need me to say that the paradigm that we have at Yale and that very many liberal arts colleges does not scale. We at Yale have we're teeny compared to your universities in large part. We have only 11,000 students. We have 3,500 faculty. You can do the division. We have a precious faculty-student ratio, which is basically we are enabled by this 300-year history of very generous graduates who have given us $17 billion in endowment, so we can afford a luxurious student-faculty ratio that allows for this kind of interactive education and pedagogy in almost all of our classes. It won't scale. That is obviously not the answer for most of the countries I visit. So what do I see happening? I thought I would just give you several of the tactics I see at some various universities. I'll tell you first about China. You know, they audaciously decided that they were going to, in 1995, they claimed that they were going to have, in 25 years, 2 of the top 10 universities in the world. Well, you know, I must say, they're now about halfway there, and many of us think that they are going to make it. And they are doing it with a sense of purpose and a sense of resolve that is really quite extraordinary. What do I see as some of their tactics? First, and this is going to have time to prove out whether it can take this to scale, but they are embedding in their leading big universities, particularly Peking University, their flagship university, Fudan University, the leading university in Fudan, Xi'an, sort of out toward the west. They are creating what we would call in our country small liberal arts colleges. They are creating right in the middle of their university a little college, and they are making it elite. I find it somewhat ironic that here is, of course, the socialist/communist country, that they want to have an elite right within their federal flagship institutions, and they compete for it, and they are evaluating students not simply by how they score in their very competitive national examination, which is so competitive, but they are doing an interview to try and assess also the opportunities for leadership. And by leadership, they are not looking simply at the Communist Party. They're They're looking at leadership in business endeavors, looking at it from how the young people have provided sports education, how they've been excelling in extracurricular kinds of activities. And they're putting these students in these colleges with a different educational system. I think you probably know that in China they follow the system which is basically was the Russian or also the continental European, where when you are 18 and you matriculate directly into a school and you start the study of economics or political science or law or medicine right then, and you proceed with it. You might actually find this familiar. And they decided in this college they're not going to do that. That what they want to do is for the first 2 years, they want the students to have a new broadly based education, fitted, if you will, from a blank sheet of paper of what are the skills and attributes that they want people to have in the 21st century, where they are making them be in smaller groups or making them debate each other. The Chinese are rather infamous for having their faculty just come and lecture from their writings from some time ago. They want this to be interactive. They're making them write a lot. They're making them speak up a lot. They're making them give oral presentations. And so they're embedding it in it. Well, first of all, they believe that this will give them an outstanding cadre of leaders who won't be as narrowly trained as those that they have in their current leadership. It is remarkable if you look at the current generation of leaders and the prior generation, Jiang Zemin's generation. They were basically all trained as engineers. Tsinghua dominated that it's a great university. I find it quite admirable that many of us like to kind of replicate ourselves, that this generation of leaders recognizes they are not trying to replicate themselves. They would like to have more broadly based leaders coming from their university. But it's not simply to have a very tiny elite. They are hoping, we'll have to wait and see if the experiment proves out, that since they are embedding this literally right on their campuses, that it will have spillover effects, and that the kind of pedagogy will start to influence how teachers will teach in other parts of the university, because these will be very prestigious faculty recruited for these new institutions. And so they hope it will have an infection, if you will, into the rest of the part of the place. Another tactic that the Chinese are embracing is that for a long period of time, they have had faculty who were recruited largely either from graduates of their own school or certainly from their own country. And they are now embarking upon doing international, global faculty searches for some of their outstanding faculty, and they are paying them on a global scale. So you have the faculty member from Harvard was just recently recruited to Xi'an, which is, not the first place those of us from, I think, Sao Paulo or the United States might have thought about going, and they are having more and more success in hiring in the great universities along the coast, and they are deciding that they have to invest more in human capital. And again, it's somewhat ironic, given their governmental structure, that they have decided they are going to have to endure, at least temporarily, a dual-tier professoriate salary to get some individuals who have reputations, research records, and teaching, I underscore, skills, perhaps beyond what they've had. Staying in that part of the world, but going south, Singapore, interestingly, has also some experiments. They have found that they have traditions in where their best and brightest have gone disproportionately into the study of medicine and law. Obviously, two great professions. I myself was trained as a lawyer and practiced law for some period of time. We need good lawyers, and we certainly all need a lot of good doctors. But they were thinking that they were getting too much of their young people slanted into those areas. And so they were saying, how, again, might we, if you will, influence over time some students to go into other modes of study that would be broadly based. They, too, have a basic tertiary structure, I think like you do, like Chinese and continental Europe has, where, again, at 18, you would go into a particular field or discipline, not surprising, having been part of the British Commonwealth. They are doing a variation of what I mentioned, the Chinese of these colleges. They also are have on the drawing board, they haven't done it like the Chinese, a small elite college. They're hoping to get the top 1 percentile of their age cohort graduating from high school to go into a small college right embedded in the National University of Singapore, their flagship university. But they are looking at it slightly different. They now have, say, a law degree, which is 4 years. And what they're saying is that we would like some students to go there and have a broad-based education for 2 years. And they're working it out with the faculty and dean of law so that the students can then go to the law school and have, say, 2.5 years by using some summers. And so it only takes a little bit longer than the traditional program to graduate with law, but that it would have this 2-year, very broad-based education, again, crafted with interactive problem-solving, critical skills, issues that you need for an educated citizenry for the future, sustainability, other kinds of subjects, but they're articulated with the professional schools so that in the end they hope that there will be sort of a win-win, still have lawyers, still have students who want to be lawyers, but they might be more broadly gauged. And over time, there'll be students in this school who can stay there for 4 years and get a degree. They also are frankly using a lot of incentives. The students who are in this small college will have unprecedented access to faculty. They will have these small seminars, and they're guaranteeing each student 2 internships, one abroad and one in Singapore with some of their outstanding government cabinet ministries or corporations or NGOs, so that this is a way that they will really try and integrate living and learning. Sort of a different model or a different tactic. They too hope that this will be a way that will over time have a percolation effect for more of the institution in terms of the modes of teaching. A third tactic that I see going around as I visit is, I would call it a new sort of multinational university. It's, imagine the corporate model, but let's apply it to higher education. Let me be clear. This is not what many of us have been doing for a long period of time. This is not having a satellite enterprise, or, buying a villa in Florence and sending some of your students and faculty there as sort of a standalone enterprise. These are truly trying to leverage the intellectual capital of more than one faculty. So I'll give you 2 examples. London School of Economics, obviously extremely well regarded, and Fudan University, as I mentioned, probably you know, the leading university, comprehensive university at least in Shanghai. They have a 2-year program. All of the student body, which is a global student body, spends the first year at the London School of Economics. They spend the second year in Shanghai. They are able, the faculty, jointly, to leverage the talents of the faculty on both campuses so that the courses in the first year, obviously, if you will, skew toward the talents of the faculty in London. The second year is derived precisely to draw on the talents of the faculty in Shanghai. So you leverage the human capital. You don't have to replicate as much in terms of the faculty coverage. Similar one at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, one of our great engineering schools, as you know, and National University of Singapore. They have a 2-year master's program where the students take, in a very concrete way, it's not like just decide in your junior year you're going to take a semester in Spain or take a semester in France. It's very well organized and designed that you take certain courses at certain times in MIT, in Massachusetts, or at Singapore, and which brings me to my transition, is that you take some courses via the internet in real time. And in some ways, this is difficult. In Singapore, it is 12 hours time difference from the United States. So it's 8 a.m. in MIT when the faculty member is teaching, and it's 8 p.m. or vice versa in the NUS. The exciting prospects for me are for those of us in the Americas, where we actually are basically only 2 or 3 hours difference in time, how much we could take advantage of some of these multinationals. But all of my scouting report so far of these tactics that I see being experimented with to have more interactive, more dynamic tertiary education are, you can see, quite marginal. These are small incremental activities. Yes, they may have percolation effect, but still, for a long period of time, they're going to help only a small number of institutions, and even then at the margins. So I wanted just to run through, if you'll be patient, some slides of what I see of a true exciting possibility that I think can have much deeper and broader impact. And that goes to the digital dissemination of educational materials. You know, all of our great universities, those here and those in my home country, have the same core mission. It is threefold. It's the creation of knowledge by what our faculty do through their own research. It's the preservation of knowledge, what we do through our libraries and through our museums and our collections. And it's the dissemination of knowledge, which has been through teaching and publication. You know, the dissemination of knowledge has been largely unchanged for, I would say, a millennium. I mean, if you think about it, go back a century. Is there any major employment sector that you can think of where the underlying business proposition has been unchanged for over a century? You think about it. If I came here to visit you a century ago, I would have done it by boat, right? If we had to communicate, we'd have to write letter. You certainly were not going to pick up your mobile. If you had manufacturing, your entire supply chain was probably within 100 kilometers of where the plant was, certainly not global. You get the idea. Almost everything, entertainment, has been remade dramatically in terms of higher education, except for higher education I can think of. Higher education model has been the same way you and I were taught, the same way Confucius taught his students, or Aristotle. It has been a teacher in the physical presence of his or her students, and it has been faculty member writing their wisdom through text or through monographs, publications, essays. So we've been talking for a long period of time about a second revolution via technology, but I really believe that we are on the cusp of it. The issue for us is, how do we increase the impact, not just the access, but the impact of knowledge? And can we see technology finally as what I would call a force multiplier for education? You probably are familiar with the term force multiplier. Those of us studying it in secondary school, the most obvious example we were taught was in the area of warfare, where in World War I, the introduction of airplanes forever changed how combat was conducted. Sort of our dream is, how do you take a professor of physics here at Yale and actually take him out in the world to get a multiplier effect, much like the airplanes forever changed the nature of warfare. We hope this will be for, if you will, more peaceful and productive ways. Our experiment has been the following proposition. We have asked ourselves, could we come as close to replicating a Yale College Great Teachers course and put it online for free? Now, many institutions have been doing distance learning for some period of time. We have a couple of different dynamics that we've been playing with. One is to do it for free. The second is that we wanted to put up there all of the components that we could think about, sort of the teacher's toolbox. So in addition to having full video of the lecture Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we also have every problem set, for example, in a physics course, this one I'm modeling here, and we have the problem solutions for every problem sets for every single course. But we wanted to do more. We wanted to have a full edited transcript of the faculty lecture. Why do we want to do this? Our thought was this: if a student in the United States, or particularly a student who did not have English as a second language, wanted to go back and review what a faculty member said, because they didn't quite catch it, they could go back and readily take a look at the transcript and say, oh, that's what the faculty member was saying in terms of what the second law of thermodynamics said. Or, oh, I now have a better understanding of this. We also wanted this to be available for those around the world. Of course, given the sort of mobile society here and internet penetration, to be able to access these either by universities or individuals is easy because of the ubiquity of broadband. But we also wanted to, for other parts of the world that don't have that kind of internet penetration, to have low bandwidth availability for this and actually audio only. We also wanted to make sure that we could have these materials, those transcripts I showed you, available so they could be downloaded for parts of the world where they could frankly just use these transcripts, pull them together, and have it be a free textbook. And we've posted all of these materials on a particular copyright license so that any faculty member can just go in and grab these materials, use them, mix them with their own materials, mix them with other materials, use them for free, never have to come back and ask us for this. And they're being used in a variety of ways, because our idea was, could we put up there on the internet, in our first instance, almost like a sample undergraduate curriculum that would have humanities, social sciences, sciences, that would have some courses of, if you will, the most traditional, Dante, New Testament, art history, Greek history, modern poetry, but could we also have some that would have the new frontiers of knowledge, astrophysics, biomedical engineering, game theory with Robert Schiller, who is going to have a big article in the Invasion magazines tomorrow, that hits the newsstands tomorrow. So some very new modes of information, as well as some classical subjects. But these are all taught by the master teachers at Yale, the ones that if you had your children come to Yale, everyone would say, if you go to Yale, make sure you do not graduate without taking this professor's course or that professor's course. So sharing what we hope is the very best of Yale for free. But this is just the beginning of what we're doing. And beginning of where I see this could be a true revolution. We have these transcripts which allow us to be in a partnership right now with Google in experimental beta testing. In fact, I leave tonight to head to California for a meeting on Monday with Google to try and perfect this. Because they have, you may know this, a rudimentary translation device, but it is not perfected by any means. And obviously, materials of scholars, professors, just like materials in government, to be almost accurate is not sufficient. I mean, if you cannot have a governmental agreement, you cannot have a scholarly text and have it 94% accurate. But if we can get these automatic transcripts to the point where they are 97, 98% accurate, we all know in editing our own work that to go back in and correct only 2% of a text takes negligible amount of time. And so it has the opportunity. So here you see right here our Professor Schiller, who will be in the magazine tomorrow, his game theory course. The transcript is superimposed as if you're watching a foreign movie. But when you push this button in this beta test, as we will now do, it can have across his the screen his lecture in Spanish or Portuguese, or what the Google platform will be is 40 different language. So imagine one of you who has a colleague who gives an outstanding law course. And this course could then be shared with those who are in the Middle East, or it could be in China, or it could be at Yale Law School. An incredible, powerful multiplier for what could be the best educational efforts by our faculties. We are already trying to do this. We have partnerships. I'll just give you a couple examples of how the materials are being used. At the University of Bahrain in the Middle East, in the middle of the screen, they have a School of American Studies. For their upper-level students, they are actually taking some of our courses in the humanities and using them as a backbone. Because if they want their students to get accepted to PhD programs in Great Britain or in other English-speaking worlds, they recognize they better have students who can follow lectures by Yale faculty members. And then, I think this is a very important piece to underscore. You say, well, doesn't this in some ways rob their own faculty of teaching responsibilities? The answer is no. Because if the students listen to our basic lecture on Dante's Inferno, Book 1, before coming to class, then the class doesn't have to be a lecture. The teacher spends that time engaging, even in a large auditorium, with faculty doing the Socratic method, asking for questions, asking for debate, to help get this kind of interactive pedagogy. So that is a more wholesale use of one of these courses. But down at Buenos Aires, they might just use a single lecture in a physics course because they think that particular lecture on coefficient of friction, for example, is extremely good. Or we have over in Fudan and Shanghai, which I've referred to before, they are using a number of our economics lectures because obviously they can do point-counterpoint. They have very different views than we might on international trade, but they can have our faculty members' presentation and then use it as a jumping off point to try and sort of inculcate a more interactive classroom pedagogy. So you can see on this that, alas, we do not have a line yet of connection here in Brazil. And one of the goals we have been having with faculty here is to find colleagues, new colleagues here who might want to experiment with the use of our materials in their classrooms and also work with us to have some of their materials be available, we hope, not only for us, because our vision, as you'll see, is to imagine a worldwide confederation of, if you will, educational materials. The opportunity here is, I think I mentioned, we all know that tertiary education drives, and I just mentioned in China alone, they have 6 times the number of students going into tertiary education. They do not have 6 times the number of qualified faculty. So if there is a way to have some of these materials from outstanding universities like your own and ours be, if you will, a booster rocket to supplement what's going on in many parts of the world, including our own universities, I think it could be a great public good. This is your great countryman, our great faculty member, Aldo Paraso, the world's greatest celloist, who's been on our faculty now for, believe it or not, 50 years. The way he was taught was, of course, in the way you and I were taught, which is in the presence of another master teacher. But we now have at Yale, again, another way of imagining a multiplier effect. We have here, this is the well-regarded chair of our opera program, and she is doing a master class with an aspiring opera singer in Cleveland and in the United States. But it doesn't have to be Cleveland. You know, it could be Cairo. It could be right here in Rio. And this is yet another mode of how we might get a multiplier effect to have outstanding education be on a much more shared platform. We know that there are many other universities that are starting to dabble in this. This is some online materials from the University of Tokyo, and they also are playing with the Google platform because, as you could see, maybe if it's big enough that this is not in Japanese, it's already translated in English. Zurich has some very exciting courses, obviously a scientific powerhouse. Our colleague MIT has been focusing on how they might repurpose their materials for high schools, which we think is another very important opportunity here. And here in your country, there are a number of institutions that are doing some work in the distance space, primarily now for, understandably, to have registrations where you get tuitions, and which is something that I think is important to get this access leverage as well. And we would hope in the years to come we might really be able to figure out how we do get this kind of multiplier. I have a view that no longer are we going to have university standalone operations like our distance learning, your distance learning, as you could see. I also don't believe that we're going to have confederations that are only, say, we are powered by Cisco and someone else is powered by Google. What I see is that we're going to have multi-stakeholder collaborations. And we are now in conversations, actually beyond conversations, in design with Cisco as well as with Google to design a common platform that all institutions could freely mount their materials. So right now, if you were to try and search for the most outstanding materials, just to stick with this discipline of physics, on any topic in physics that you would want, velocity, I promise you, if you go home and Google this, you will have all kinds, you'll have, 15,000 hits. You can't separate good from bad. And there's no sort of accrediting agency of where you'd have institutions of the standing that we're visiting with go on it. If we could have a platform so you could search, so you could actually type in whatever it might be, velocity, friction, and get the most outstanding materials across 200, 300, 400 universities that faculty could access for free as if it were an online, if you will, library where you can check out the books for free and use them as you have been. I think it has extraordinary power for what tertiary education can contribute, and that it could free faculty members, particularly in areas where they're burdened with huge classes or where they're burdened with having to teach too many courses, so that they could have more of the pre-class teaching go on using video, using simulations, using materials that are really multimedia rich. So then their value added in the classroom can be more directed toward this interactive platform that we need. So this is a little bit of a tour of your educational scout going out there around the world, and I know that whether it's from leadership you've given from governmental perspective, leadership that many of you give from university and from classroom, that you are thinking about much of these ways to advance the well-being of your countrymen and women in ways that they will be productive for Brazil and productive for larger world concerns. We had a president of Yale more than 150 years ago who was a very forward-looking man, and he said that our role as universities is not to create individuals for the moment, but citizens for the world. So that, I think, of course, is one of our great challenges for the 21st century. Thanks for having me here.